today. It's a lovely afternoon. I'm here to have an afternoon conversation with all of you, and that's lovely, like it always is. A few things to talk about today. So before we get going, as usual, be sure to hit the like button, be sure to hit the subscribe button, be sure to hit the notifications bell. And as always, post this on your Facebook, on your Reddit, on your Twitter, on everywhere that things are posted, on your Instagram, on your, whoa. See, that's what took me a little bit. I hate being late for anything, folks. Did you know that? I am one of these people that whenever I'm late for anything, wow, this camera is getting shaky. Every time I'm late for anything, I constantly am envisioning the people who are waiting for me, and that causes me to be on time for everything. So there you go. I really hate being late, but today things were wobbly with the camera. It's a lovely afternoon. Shout out to folks who are watching from around the country. Shout out for people who are watching from around the world. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Now, for those of you who've been here, you already know this, but for those of you who may be just joining us, as our subscription rate has been increasing, the way we do these streams is they're in three parts. First, I give my opening remarks. Then from there, I do the roll call. And then I answer your super chat questions. I spend the stream writing down your super chat questions with this pen. As the super chat questions come in, I write them down. And then I spend the second half of the show answering your super chat questions. And then the show is over. That's how we do our show. We did a great show yesterday. We did a great show the day before that. And we're just doing great stuff. U.S. government UFO footage. U.S. government UFO footage. Very, very good. So that's how we do our show. So with no further ado, I am going to jump right in to my opening remarks. I'll be writing your super chat questions down, and then I'll answer them in the second half of the program. So that's how it works. So, folks, a couple news items I would like to update you on. News item number one is that Pedro Castillo, a Marxist-Leninist from the Peru Libre Party, is now recognized as the official winner of the election. Took him gosh darn long enough, but Pedro Castillo, a socialist, a Marxist-Leninist, an anti-imperialist who says that there should be no poverty in a rich country like Peru, has been recognized as the winner of the election, right? In Peru, a country where the left has been behind the rest of South America due to the legacy of the disgusting terrorist organization known as Sendero Luminoso. Now we see a mass working class movement, weather manipulation, it's like Conspiracy Day, a mass working class movement, led by Pedro Castillo, has won the presidency. So this is very exciting. And Pedro Castillo, he represents the indigenous folks who've been fighting for their land against the big corporations. He represents the labor unions, an amazing platform, which I printed out and read on the stream. It sounds like I could have written it. I mean, he practically says we need a government of action to fight for working families. Just a great stuff. Literature, poetry in socialism. So just great stuff. And we're all really excited about it. If you're a progressive person, if you're anti-imperialist, pogroms, persecution in USSR. If you're a progressive person, if you're an anti-imperialist, you should be overjoyed that Pedro Castillo has been recognized as the winner of the election. So that's the first news item, a victory. And we should learn from Pedro Castillo because that's a real socialist movement there, right? And it's about mobilizing the masses of people. It has an economic program, a revolutionary program of raising people out of poverty, economic development. It's really great stuff. So we should all be celebrating the victory in Peru. Now, The next item that you may be aware of, all right, Eurasianism, Atlanticism. The next thing you should probably be aware of. The next thing that you should probably be aware of is that interesting information is surfacing about the origins of the hashtag through which the anti-government protests in Cuba have been mobilized. SOS Cuba was originally tweeted from a specific account that was putting out a tweet more than once every 5 seconds. It was and the origins of the SOS Cuba hashtag. Details are surfacing. People should check that out. I'm not going to get into too much detail about it, right? But we know that there are these anti-government protests in Cuba, that Cuba's had a lot of hardship because of the economic blockade, and especially because of the pandemic and the tourism slowdown. But now we're finding, and thank you, Gleb, for your super chat, we're finding the roots of the SOS Cuba hashtag to be very, very shady. And we have the Cuban Communist Party and their leadership coming out and, basically showing how there is tech sabotage, there's fake news coming out, there's all kinds of news stories that are not accurate. It looks like the Cuban government they have things under control. I don't talk about people I work with, Cameron. That's generally how I work. Can you describe the distinction between mercantile capitalism and what we have today? Sure. Mercantile capitalism and what we have today, and today distinction. So it looks like the Cuban government, as they are getting things under control, they are getting to the roots of what's really going on here. The direct ties of American intelligence to this destabilization operation are very clear. Now, I have played my part in kind of exposing this movement. For those of you who haven't seen the video that I made, I accidentally stumbled on to no problem, Cameron. I accidentally stumbled on to an SOS Cuba protest, and so I walked up to the protesters and asked many of them if they supported the blockade, if they wanted to end the blockade, and they all told me in English and in Spanish that they supported the blockade. They said bloqueo is good, the blockade is good. No, we don't want to get rid of the blockade. We want to end communism, they said. So they don't really want to help their people. So I made that video, and it's on the channel. You can go check out my video, SOS Cuba, protesters. All right, all right, absolutely. 1979, did the USA think China would become capitalist? And, at that point, these SOS Cuba protesters are out there, and they're protesting, and I confronted them. Thank you, Yair. Thank you very much. I confronted them about, whether or not they supported the blockade. And they all told me they supported the blockade. So all their humanitarian concerns for the Cuban people were a lie. You can't support the Cuban people and support an economic embargo that prevents them from getting medicine and food. You can't support the Cuban people and support a travel ban that hurts their tourism. You can't support the Cuban people and support an economic embargo that keeps them from getting car parts and airplane parts. You just can't do it. All right, China, Syria meeting. You just can't do it. You just can't do it. I made that video. I want folks to know that, that video did okay here on this channel, a few thousand views, that's good. But that video was shown on Venezuelan television. There's a weekly television program in Venezuela that airs every Wednesday. And that program was featured on Venezuelan TV. And literally millions of people in Venezuela watched that video from our YouTube channel. So, we're hitting 17,000 subscribers. But that video was very important. It was on Venezuelan TV, and from what I understand, it was then passed on to Cuban TV, which was very important. It's very important for the Cuban people to see that the SOS Cuba protesters don't really want to help them. The people in the United States promoting their movement support the blockade. So that video was very, very important. I mean, it had a decent amount of views. I got all kinds of hate messages from the right-wing Cubans, but millions of Venezuelans and then later millions of Cubans watched that video and learned the truth about the SOS Cuba movement. That was a big victory for our channel. The fact that we played a role in exposing the SOS Cuba hoax. That's very big, right? And it seems like, again, the social media activity around it is not particularly large in our end of things. But the fact that it was shown on television in Venezuela and in Cuba, that's huge. That's a huge breakthrough. We all played a role in getting that video out here. I remember I had a stream scheduled the night of that protest, and I was all ready to stream with you all, and then I saw that, so I edited the video really quick before we put it up here. So that's a real big win for our community. Our community is really doing well. We are, we are doing very, very well as a movement. And I should let you all know that. A lot of things are going on. Pretty soon you're going to learn a lot more about the John Brown volunteers. There's going to be a lot more. I mean, there's these John Brown volunteers. I'm so proud of them. Young people from around the country, from Illinois, from Pennsylvania, from Nebraska, from Georgia, that are hitting the streets of New York every day, distributing buttons that say "End the wars, bring the troops home," or "Cancel student debt," distributing palm cards with the information of the Center for Political Innovation. You'll be hearing a lot more out of them pretty soon. I don't want to tell you too much because I don't want to preempt it, but the John Brown volunteers are doing amazing stuff, Rosa Luxemburg Theory and Praxis. They're doing very, very amazing stuff, just very, very amazing stuff, and I'm very excited about that. So many good things are happening, despite the fact that we're in a little bit of a crisis. I mean, we are in a little bit of a crisis as a country, as a world, right? We're coming out of this pandemic. This is late stage capitalism. This is an economic disaster. There is mass malnutrition taking place in Africa, which nobody's talking about. But, in all over Nigeria, all over Africa, Nigeria is particularly badly hit, but other parts of Africa as well. There is malnutrition happening as a result of the pandemic, and no one's talking about it. Mass malnutrition, people hungry. How can anyone be hungry in this world right now, right? I mean, so much food is produced, right? I mean, the means of producing food is vast. How can anyone be hungry in this kind of world, right? With so much efficiency, where, we've got, artificial intelligence. How can anyone be hungry? Well, the answer is capitalism. The answer is having an economy organized to make profits for a few. That's the only way. Only capitalism could make a situation where people are hungry in the world right now. With so much efficiency, so much abundance of food being produced. I mean, just vast production of food around the world. Russia's having a big farming boom. China's having has had a big farming boom. The United States has their huge agribusiness industry. How in the world can anyone be malnourished? The answer is capitalism, only capitalism. And how in Africa, right? A continent full of oil, a continent full of natural gas, continent full of the most valuable minerals. How can anybody be hungry? The answer is the rule of the world by big multinational corporations, the rule of the world by big banks based in Western countries, a global economic order where a few small corporations enrich themselves and keep the world poor in order to make themselves rich. And that's called imperialism. And that's what Lenin wrote an entire book about, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Dog whistles, neo-Nazis, and favorite films. Okay, writing it down. So there you go. And I mean, we all know that Jeff Bezos, he went into outer space, and that they're doing this thing where the billionaires are doing their outer space thing. I did a story on that that was aired. It was on television today around the world. It'll be on TV. It'll be up here on the YouTube channel pretty soon. So, a couple other things, right? Inflation. I don't know if you know this, but right now, the price of food has increased about 8%. There's about an 8% hike in the price of food here in the United States. In addition to that, gasoline has the highest prices in 7 years. That's working people who have to fill up their tanks in order to get to work in places that don't have adequate public transportation. And the price of gasoline has gone up dramatically. It's almost doubled from what it was last year. Working families are being squeezed by this inflation. This inflation is squeezing working families. It's just squeezing them. It's just viciously squeezing working families. You know, here in the United States, the richest country in the world, we're getting squeezed. You know, on top of that, you know, we do have the new JFK movie that was created by Oliver Stone. Oliver Stone has produced a new documentary about the JFK assassination. And it's very, very good. I would check it out, right? And the fact that mainstream media is ignoring it, the fact that mainstream media has, you know, has basically, you know, ignored this new film. It's at the Cannes Film Festival about the JFK assassination. That shows that I think it might be on to something. That's big news as well. I don't know if folks heard other big news, which is that Tom Barrack, who was a member of the Trump administration, has just been arrested for being an illegal lobbyist. They're alleging that he was lobbying Donald Trump on behalf of the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, you know, you know, the United Arab Emirates, it's alleged, were paying Tom Barrack to lobby Donald Trump. He's been charged with being an illegal lobbyist. All of these things are happening, right? I just went over SOS Cuba. I just went over inflation. I just went over the JFK movie. I just went over the crisis of malnutrition. I just talked about Tom Barrack being arrested. I just talked about Pedro Castillo being elected. Folks, all of this fits into analysis that I have been giving you for the past several years. If you want to understand what's happening right now, you need to understand the fight in the ruling class. I've been telling you that Joe Biden is the new Jimmy Carter. Now we're seeing that. Soft power, right? Attempted color revolutions in Cuba, while the USA appears to be withdrawing from Afghanistan. Mass inflation. Does that sound familiar? Greek philosophy. Influence on Mao. All right, writing these super chats down. All right. Algeria's Ben Bali. Okay. Algeria's Ben Bella. And thank you, Piano Man, for the super chat. Much appreciated. Much appreciated. We've also, you know, I've been telling you about this. Bolton is beating the war drum for Pakistan because of Iran-Pakistan oil pipeline. Pakistan, war drums, Iran, Pakistan pipeline. All right. Just writing them down as they come in. That Joe Biden is the new Jimmy Carter. We're facing mass inflation. The United States is trying to look like it's more accommodating, like it's retreating around the world, while the intelligence apparatus escalates tensions. Thank you, Shbang. Thank you, Shbang. I appreciate the super chat. The United States is trying to look accommodating and softer, while escalating its international covert operations. There's inflation destroying the domestic economy of the United States. There's a new movie about the JFK assassination and the details about the JFK assassination. So what's going on here? What is going on? Why is this happening? Thank you, Herb. Again, this fits into analysis that I've been giving all of you for the past several years. If you read my book on Kamala Harris, you will learn about the fight within the ruling class. There is a fight inside of the ruling class. This is a long-standing fight. I'm not the first person to discover this fight, okay? I didn't think of it. I didn't discover this by any means. If you want to learn, you know, people who've documented this fight, go and read The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby. Great book. I've read the book many times. Carl Oglesby was a leader of Students for a Democratic Society in the 1960s, and in the 1970s, he wrote a book explaining the JFK assassination, explaining the Watergate scandal, explaining the political war of the 1960s, where it seemed like the elite of the United States were fighting each other, and he called it the Yankee and Cowboy War. But before before Carl Oglesby wrote this book, there was another book published by Carroll Quigley. Carroll Quigley, who was a mentor, a personal mentor to Bill Clinton. And Carroll Quigley wrote a book called The Anglo-American Establishment. The Anglo-American Establishment. And it was about the Council on Foreign Relations, the Round Table Group, the Rhodes Scholar Program, and how there is an axis of power within the American elite that is tied very closely to Britain, tied very closely in with big oil, and tied very closely in with banking. And that there is a fight among the American elite. There's been a long divide between this Eastern establishment, the ultra-rich, the Anglo-American establishment, and the rest of the capitalists in the United States. So Carroll Quigley wrote about this. Vince Copeland, who was a founder of the Workers' World Party, a great Marxist writer and analyst, wrote a very good book called Market Elections. And he also talked about the role of the Rockefeller family and the fights between the Rockefeller family and the rest of the capitalist class. You can read all of these books and get this analysis, this understanding that there is a fight between the entrenched, powerful American elite money, the old money interests of New England, the banking elite that are tied in with the intelligence apparatus and with the Council on Foreign Relations and with the big Wall Street banks and the 4 super major oil companies. They have been fighting it out with the lower level capitalists who tend to be tied in with the military industrial complex and the domestic economy of the United States. And that this long-standing fight among our elite, it has been going on a long time. It took place during the Roosevelt years, right? During the Roosevelt years, there was an economic crisis in the United States. People were literally starving to death on the streets. And the lower-level capitalists, the factory owners like Henry Ford and others, wanted a fascist dictatorship. But the ultra-rich, the Rockefellers, they wanted to basically try to stabilize things and keep a more liberal order. And so Roosevelt aligned with the Rockefellers and with the labor movement and beat back the attempt by the lower-level capitalists to install a fascist dictatorship. The lower-level capitalists, Henry Ford, the National Association of Manufacturers, they liked Mussolini and they liked Hitler. The Rockefellers, they liked the British. They didn't like Hitler. And the communists and the labor movement, they certainly didn't like Hitler. And so there was a divide. And the reason the United States was on the side it was on in the Second World War was because the Anglo-American establishment entered a temporary alliance with the organized labor movement, with the Soviet Union, against the lower-level capitalists, the factory owners. But that's ancient history. We're talking about the 1930s now. Everything changed after World War II. And folks, this is what you need to understand about post-World War II, right? From 1951 to 1973, you had the biggest episode of economic growth in all of human history. The post-World War II economic expansion. From 1951 to 1973, there has never been so much economic growth as there was during that time. That was a time in which there was vast expansion of the means of production. All kinds of people were lifted out of poverty. All kinds of mass construction went on. It was a period of huge economic growth. Massive economic growth. The biggest period in human history. Never has there been so much economic growth as there was among that time. 1951 to 1973, the post-World War II economic expansion, right? Almost every major city in the industrialized world had been blown to bits in a war. And after that war, there was a mass reconstruction that went on. And this period of the post-World War II economic expansion, you'll notice there was barely any free market libertarian capitalism anywhere in the world during this time. When libertarians say, socialism doesn't work and you can't have the government involved, if you just get the government out, everything will work. Well, they're living on planet Saturn, because the biggest period of economic expansion in all of human history was the period when the communist and socialist countries of the world were expanding. Eastern Europe was reindustrializing with socialism. China had joined the socialist camp. North Korea was in the socialist camp. North Vietnam was in the socialist camp. Cuba moved into the socialist camp. All kinds of economic expansion was happening in the countries run by communists, first of all, right? And I mean, you know, they were building hospitals and schools and electrifying Eastern Europe and paving the roads, and, you know, and the Soviet Union was teaming up with you know, the government of Egypt to electrify Egypt and build the Aswan Dam. And, you know, and it was a mass period of construction in the socialist and communist countries. It was also a period of huge amounts of heavy state involvement in the capitalist countries of the developing world. For example, in Iran. In Iran, there was a dictator called the Shah. You know, the Shah, the Pahlavi family. They were the dictators, you know, backed by the United States. And people in Iran were very hungry and starving. And the United States very much feared that Iran would have a communist revolution. So the Kennedy administration went to the Shah of Iran, and they told him, they basically forced the Shah of Iran to stage what they called the White Revolution. And it's very well understood that the White Revolution of 1963 in Iran was very much a maneuver by the U.S. imperialists, kind of forcing the Shah to enact a lot of dramatic reforms in order to prevent a Red Revolution. The White Revolution of the Shah was the USA twisting his arm and forcing him to take moves that would prevent a Red Revolution. And the Shah of Iran, he was forced to redistribute some land, he was forced to build some airplanes and some railroads, and he was forced to do some kind of progressive things because the USA was afraid there might be a communist revolution in Iran. In South Korea, the United States forced the dictator Park Chung-hee to build a steel industry. And they forced Japan, which was at that point still occupied by U.S. troops, they forced Japan to loan millions of dollars to South Korea, to the dictator Park Chung-hee, so that he could industrialize South Korea. There's many examples of this. You know, you had the Peronist kind of movements in Argentina and elsewhere, and you had the United States kind of scrambling and working with these authoritarian military dictatorships to carry out economic development to stabilize these countries to prevent communist revolution. And then on top of that, in Europe, you had the welfare state, the Keynesian welfare states. You know, they started giving everybody free health care in Britain and France and Germany and elsewhere. And you had, you know, you started having, you know, guaranteed employment in Norway and Sweden. And so the idea that free market policies lead to economic growth is malarkey, because during the period where there was the biggest amount of economic expansion in all of human history, the post-World War II economic expansion, there was like no free market policies anywhere in the world. I mean, neoliberalism was not happening, right? In communist countries, they were industrializing with socialism. In capitalist third world countries, you had military juntas and Bonapartist regimes that were using heavy state involvement to industrialize countries. And then on top of that, in Western Europe, you had the Keynesian welfare states. And even in the United States at that point, it was much more of a welfare state at that point. Labor unions were at the height of their strength. The 50s and 60s in the United States, organized labor was very, very strong. You know, those good-paying industrial jobs people talk about in the auto mills and the steel plants, they all had militant unions, and the Teamsters had organized the truck drivers. The wages of the American workers, if adjusted for inflation, are far, far bigger than they are now. You know, there was all kinds of union protections. Rich people paid much bigger percentages of taxes back in the 50s and 60s. So this idea that free market policies and neoliberalism are necessary for growth is just ridiculous, because the greatest period of economic expansion in all of human history, you know, in all of human history, was a period where there was barely any neoliberal economic policies. But coming out of World War II, you have the post-World War II economic expansion, okay? And you have to remember that during the Roosevelt years, you know, the Rockefellers, the Eastern establishment, had worked with the Roosevelt administration to kind of, you know, have kind of a Bonapartist regime to stabilize capitalism. Roosevelt died at the end of World War II. Truman was president. You have the Red Scare, right? The USA is having McCarthyism. And the Red Scare starts out among Democrats. So the Democrats are purging the more pro-Soviet and more left-leaning voices within their own party. It starts out with Truman and the mainstream Democrats getting rid of people like Henry Wallace and driving them out and all of that. But pretty soon, especially after the Chinese Revolution in 1949. Pretty soon after that, the Republicans get in on McCarthyism. And Republicans start saying that all Democrats are soft on communism. And they rally around the slogan, "Who lost China?" That was their slogan that they used. Who lost China? As if China belonged to the United States. Who lost China? Who lost China? And they start going after the Democrats and saying the Democrats are soft on communism. They lost China. Look, Roosevelt during World War II gave guns to Mao. Oh, look, somebody in the Roosevelt administration once shook hands with a Chinese communist. So the Democrats are a bunch of traitors. And so within the Republican Party, you get Joe McCarthy, and you get this uprising of the lower level capitalists against the Rockefellers. They start accusing the Rockefellers of being communists. And there's a lot of really bizarre literature from this time period. Joe McCarthy, let's remember, he accused the U.S. Army of being communists, okay? Somehow the U.S. military were communists, the Rockefellers were communists, everybody was a communist. And this anti-communism, this McCarthyism, it stops just being a way to, make sure there's no dissent and protest in the United States. It starts to turn into a vehicle for these lower-level capitalists to push back against the ultra-rich, right? And this is happening all throughout the United States. The lower-level capitalists who feel like the ultra-rich have all the power and want a more libertarian economic mode, they're kind of revolting against the ultra-rich families. And that's where the term Rockefeller Republican comes in. In the early 60s, you had the nomination of Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater became this rising voice within the Republican Party. And he was not supported by the Rockefellers. The Rockefeller family had been Republicans, but they did not support Barry Goldwater. And a lot of the Goldwater Republicans, the more far-right Republicans, you could call them, start complaining about the Eastern establishment in Republican Party politics. And there starts to be a feeling in the Republican Party, that if you are not part of the far right wing view, if you're not a John Birch Society member, the John Birch Society was really growing, then the Republican Party is not for you. And there's people aligned with the Rockefellers made statements like there's a whiff of fascism in the air. And the Rockefellers and the ultra-rich left the Republican Party, and they seemed to be in with Johnson and Kennedy and others. And that was the shift. That was taking place. And the Republican Party during this time was very much the party of lower-level capitalists that were using McCarthyism and using, the anti-communist hysteria to kind of revolt against the big money entrenched interests. And this kind of fight, it went on, as you get into the political crisis of the 1960s. And you can talk about how a lot of the 1960s New Left was being funded by the CIA, right? The Congress for Cultural Freedom program started in the 50s. That was a CIA program funneling money to left-wing activists, but anti-communist leftists, right? Susan Sontag, Hannah Arendt, Irving Howe, Irving Kristol, just trying to prop up voices that were in the correspondence. Voices that were in the Republican Party, voices that were left-wing, I should say, leftist voices that were anti-communist. You had the kind of the reforming of leftist politics. Leftist politics changes as what they call the New Left, which comes out of the Frankfurt School. Herbert Marcuse, who was a U.S. State Department official, who then ended up working in Germany and became this big Marxist professor, but he said working class people are not revolutionary. The revolution will actually come from the intellectuals. You have Gloria Steinem, who becomes the voice of feminism in the United States, even though she admits she was a CIA operative, and she started out like infiltrating communist youth gatherings for the CIA and brags about it. And these kind of CIA voices become the face of left-wing politics, and left-wing politics starts to change. Left-wing politics is no more about worker populism. It's no longer about the workers and the bosses. It's no longer about the capitalists who exploit the workers and the workers, wanting economic justice. No, 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 no. The slogan is do your own thing, man. Do your own thing, man. It's not about fighting for the working class. No, 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 no. It's about fighting against Cold War conformity. It's about using drugs. It's about using pornography. It's about lifting restraints on social liberalism. It's about lifting restraints on human behavior, and that it shifts, right? The left shifts to be this group of people that reject kind of the militarism of U.S. society, reject some of the conservative traditional values, and are fighting for the individual, the rights of the individual against the collective, right? And this is the new change in left-wing politics. It's no longer a movement of the proletariat to seize the means of production and have a rationally organized economy. Instead, it's a movement of intellectuals trying to do their own thing. And you have like Jerry Rubin, who was a big voice in the 1960s, right? He was asked what was the greatest achievement of his generation. And he said, we got rid of the World War II mentality. We got rid of the World War II mentality, getting rid of the collectivism that came out of World War II, getting rid of the populism of the Roosevelt years and the progressive anti-fascism. And instead, we broke down the solidarity that the U.S. public had, right? And we got rid of the World War II mentality. World War II was a moment where the United States was on the right side of history, aligned with the Soviet Union, aligned with China against fascism. World War II was a moment where, Roosevelt proposed an economic Bill of Rights, and Roosevelt was pretty much, he was moving toward becoming a full socialist at the time of his death. The World War II mentality, there were certainly problems with it. Japanese internment was horrendous. No one would support that, but the World War II mentality, that was, the beginning of anti-racism, Superman comic books condemning the Ku Klux Klan. They were telling people in the United States that if you were a racist, you were supporting the Nazis because the Nazis promoted racism. It was a very, very progressive moment, when the USA was aligned with the Soviet Union and China to defeat the Nazis, a very progressive moment. Well, the new left was about undoing that and making leftism about something else, not about the working people coming together, rejecting racism, fighting for a society where everyone has jobs, housing, and education, where the means of production are controlled by the people. No, 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 no. Getting rid of World War II mentality leftism and replacing it with this pessimistic, hopeless, drug-using social liberalism. That was the focus. It was deconstructing the politics of William Z. Foster and replacing it with the politics of Aleister Crowley, with the politics of Hannah Arendt and Susan Sontag and Mary McCarthy. It was about deconstructing what leftism is really about. So you have the left changing. And, the Carter administration, it's the first time the Democrats are in power post the 1960s, right? Lyndon Johnson was confused and didn't even run for a re-election, and Kennedy was assassinated before that. But then you have Nixon, who's a conservative. Then you have Gerald Ford, but then you get the Carter administration. And what the Carter administration is the Carter administration is the new left in power. It's not Roosevelt and his Popular Front. It's not Kennedy and his alliance with the civil rights movement and his support of the space program and all that. It is a new formation. It is the new left in power, right? It is the pessimistic new left takes power. And so what does the Carter administration do? Well, the USA has been defeated in Vietnam. And so Jimmy Carter is widely remembered as the peace president. He's the only president who didn't send troops somewhere around the world. Every other president sent the military or was involved in a war, not Jimmy Carter, right? Jimmy Carter is this calm man. He's super calm. He's just really calm. And he has these fireside chats where he says, I'm sorry everyone's so upset. I'm Jimmy Carter. I'm a peanut farmer, and I care about you. I'm going to listen to you because I care about you. The United States doesn't look scary anymore. You got Richard Nixon and all this scary. The United States looks calm. It looks friendly. I'm an old man peanut farmer, and I just want to make America better. I care about you, and I care about your family. And it's this calm image for the United States, a very big shift, right? On top of that, you have rampant inflation, right? Inflation is going crazy. What does inflation do? It decimates the lower level capitalists, right? If you're a small business owner, even if you're a big business owner, it ruins you. And it paves the way for a monopoly by that Eastern establishment. Almost everybody in the Carter administration comes out of something called the Trilateral Commission. The Trilateral Commission. This is a think tank started by Zbigniew Brzezinski, who Jimmy Carter called himself a student of, Zbigniew Brzezinski. Okay. Old left politics matter today. Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski have this think tank called the Trilateral Commission. And the Trilateral Commission says, okay, the USA, we lost in the Vietnam War. How can we turn things around? How can we completely change U.S. foreign policy so that we win again? How can we stop the rise of communism around the world? How can we dominate the world? How do we do it? And the entire Carter administration practically comes out of this Trilateral Commission. And who paid for the Trilateral Commission? The Rockefellers. David Rockefeller paid for the whole thing. So this Trilateral Commission is drawing up policies. One of the themes of the Trilateral Commission is they say we need to move toward a post-industrial United States. A post-industrial United States. This idea that we're going to have this big, prosperous middle class and working in factories and